to be. We're in Hebrews chapter 7. You turn your Bibles there, please. Hebrews chapter 7. As you'll remember, as we were studying last week, and at the end of the week before, we had mentioned that last week's lesson was going to be a kind of a break in what the Hebrew writer was saying. And I think that's important for us to note here, something very important. And that is what the Hebrew writer is getting ready to talk about is pretty deep stuff. We know that because of what he says. If you back up all the way to chapter 5, and notice what he says there in verse 9 of chapter 5, 9 and 10. He says these words. And then 11, I'm sorry. 9, 10 through 11. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. About this, we have much to say, and it's hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you, again, the basic principles. Now, I noted 2 weeks ago when we read that last week's lesson, what we were going to study last week, was going to be just, he was going to be making a point about how they should have been growing and what the fact that they weren't growing could do to them. Well, now we're starting chapter 7, verse 1, and he's going to continue with those things that they weren't ready to hear, that that he wanted to tell them, but they weren't ready to hear. But that doesn't stop him from telling them. How do I know that? Well, look at the end of chapter 6. He repeats where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Exactly what he said just before he says, you're not ready to hear this. You should be ready to hear this, but you're not. Now he's going to tell them anyway. I think that's a very important thing. We mentioned it last week in our lesson last week. God requires, that's the word. He requires us to grow. And the idea that, well, I might not be ready to hear this yet, isn't going to be acceptable in stopping from talking about it. The Hebrew writer is going to tell them, and they just need to catch up. For you and I, we're going to be reading this and noting it, and if we're not ready for it, we need to catch up. We need to get it with the program and learn these things. He's saying these things to a people, as we've been noting all the way through the book of Hebrews, to a people who were immature enough that they were considering going back under the old law because they missed it. They missed the routine that they were used to. Whatever the situation was, they liked it better. Whatever the situation was, they were wanting to go back under the old law. And the whole book of Hebrews is to tell these Jewish Christians why that's not a good idea. And it wasn't God's plan to continue with the old covenant. And that the old covenant was merely a shadow of the things to come in the new covenant. And so now he's going to tell us one more thing that shows that the old covenant is no longer in effect. And he's going to tell us one more thing, or a couple different things actually, that makes the new covenant better than the old covenant. That shows the new covenant to be better than the old covenant. The priesthood of Jesus Christ, which is after the order of Melchizedek. Now, that's an interesting statement in and of itself. Because Melchizedek is a man that we only see in 4 verses in the Old Testament. 3 of them, 18, 19, it's 3. 3 of them is in Genesis chapter 14. I'm not going to turn there, but I'm just going to mention it to you. Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 through 20. Melchizedek meets Abraham after Abraham had rescued his nephew Lot and a bunch of other people out of Sodom and Gomorrah after they had been attacked by some nations. And he One man with all of his servants. That shows you how strong Abraham was. It also explains to you a little bit about what a city and a king of a city was like in Abraham's time. We're not talking about like the Queen of England who rules a huge nation like Britain, but we're talking about the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of like three other places that were attacked by the king of 3 or 4 other cities and overwhelmed. All right, these were cities. Think about, for instance, a city the size of Elkins, or maybe probably even smaller than that. That was attacked by another city, and they carted off many of the people. Well, Abraham, a very rich man of his day, took his servants and went and beat those 4 or 5 kingdoms that had come in and took his nephew Lot and all those other people. On the way back, he meets a man named Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the king of Salem. The only way we know that is because the text tells us that. We're going to see a couple other things about him. But it's not just what we know about Melchizedek that helps us to see what his priesthood, how Christ's priesthood is, or actually Melchizedek's priesthood is likened unto Christ. You'll see what I mean here in a few moments. And using that to show that Christ's priesthood is better than the Levitical priesthood, the priesthood under Aaron. Let's look at this one each verse at a time. Go with me, please. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a 10th part of everything. He is first of everything. He, speaking of Melchizedek, is first by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Salem, that is, king of peace. Now, this Melchizedek himself was a king and a priest. All right? Now, here's one way that Jesus Christ is going to be noted of being like Melchizedek. Jesus Christ, we've already seen, is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Jesus Christ is also king. King of the church. All of power and authority is given to him in heaven and on earth. Okay? He has authority. He's a king. Something you will never see under the Old Testament about a king of Israel able to be priest or a priest of Israel able to be king. You will not see that anywhere under the old law. Reason for that is you had to be of the tribe of Levi in order to be a priest. Once David came along, you had to be under the tribe of Judah, a descendant of David, in order to be king of Israel. So the two could not be connected. You could not have one being the king of both. Well, Jesus is after the order of Melchizedek. He was a king. He was a priest. We're going to see a little bit more about that, why that's important here in a few moments. But keep going. And Melchizedek received a tithe from Abraham. Okay, Abraham had gotten some loot when he had come in there and attacked those nations and took his son, his nephew back. He got some loot in doing it, and he gave a tithe to Melchizedek. Okay, Melchizedek's name, King of Righteousness. We understand, of course, how that is certainly a shadow of Jesus Christ coming, an antitype, some people call it. But it shows a connection with Jesus. Jesus Christ is righteousness. He is a king in righteousness. And then he is also king of Salem. That is, the word Salem means peace. And the Hebrew writer says Melchizedek is the king of priests. Well, what's Jesus' relationship to priest according to Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6? He's the Prince of Peace. That's right. Jesus Christ is Prince of Peace. So even by the connection of righteousness and peace, Jesus Christ, the angels on the day he was born, told the shepherds that peace among men of whom God is well pleased. That peace is something that Jesus Christ brought the opportunity for when he came into the world. Okay? Verse 3. He is, now this is talking about Melchizedek. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither the beginning of days nor the end of life. Now, let me finish that. But resembling the Son of God, he continues as a priest forever. Notice what he says. Melchizedek resembles the Son of God. Not the Son of God, Jesus, resembles Melchizedek. Now, Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. But Melchizedek was a shadow, was something, a representation of what was going to be coming when Jesus Christ came. Now, there's a big question about, and people have tried to make all sorts of ideas about how Melchizedek didn't have a father and a mother, and yet he existed, and how he didn't have an ending, but he existed. I believe what the text is showing us, what the Hebrew writer is drawing off of, is exactly what we noted at the beginning of this lesson. Melchizedek only has 3 verses in the New Testament, in Genesis, and 1 verse in the book of Psalms, and we're going to be noting that verse in a few moments, where it's merely mentioning Melchizedek's name. And that's all we know about Melchizedek. Who was his parents? We don't know. I don't believe it means he didn't have any. But as far as you would know from the Bible, he doesn't have any. The Bible doesn't tell us. When did he die? We don't know. Nowhere in the Bible do we see when Melchizedek died. Well, how does that connect with Jesus? Well, Jesus is God in the flesh. What was his beginning? Well, he was born in... No. He was born. Well, when did the Word begin? Well, there is no beginning of God. When does God end? Well, there is no end of God. Okay, Jesus Christ, who is God, came to earth and lived as a man, but that wasn't his beginnings when he was born. It wasn't his beginnings when he was conceived. He always has existed. He always will exist. He existed as a man for 33 years on this earth, but he has existed in God always. Another thing about that is, under the Levitical priesthood, you had a lineage. You had to have. You had to show a connection to Aaron, or you couldn't be a priest, let alone a high priest. You had to have a connection to Aaron to be a high priest. Okay, so the fact that Melchizedek, well, where's his lineage that made him a priest, a priest of God? Where is that lineage of Melchizedek? There isn't any. He didn't need any. He didn't need to have a lineage that showed him able to be a priest. Jesus Christ did not either. He needed no lineage to be priest. He was made priest by God under the order of Melchizedek, and it would seem it's being implied that Melchizedek was made a priest by God, not because of any lineage. Okay, so that not having parents recognized in God's word doesn't matter as far as his priesthood. Doesn't matter for Jesus Christ to have a lineage either as far as his priesthood. To not have an end is important for the priesthood of Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is a priest forever under the order of Melchizedek. His priesthood will never end. As far as God's word is concerned, we never see an end to Melchizedek's priesthood. Now, I believe Melchizedek died one day. I believe Melchizedek had parents. But the point's being made that didn't matter as far as Melchizedek was concerned, him being a priest of God. So Jesus resembled him in that way. Melchizedek resembled Jesus in that way. I love the way that's worded in verse 3. Melchizedek resembles Jesus. It was necessary. Just like the offering of the lamb on the altar under the old covenant for the sacrifice of the sins by the high priest represents or resembles Jesus's death on the cross. Not Jesus resembles them. They resembled Jesus. That sacrifice was there as a shadow of what Jesus was going to do. Melchizedek was there as a shadow of who Jesus was going to be. Okay? So you get the idea in God's word that the whole point of mentioning Melchizedek in the first place in the Old Testament, and that Abraham stopped and gave him something, was to set everything up to show why Jesus Christ is a better high priest than the better high priest than the high priests of the Old Covenant. Again, we talked about this morning. God was thinking way back when about how he was going to bring about the new covenant and prove the new covenant to be from him. Verse 4. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of his spoils. And these descendants of Levi, who received the priestly office, have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers. Although these also are descended from Abraham. Now notice when he's talking about the greatness. How great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of his spoils. You always give a tithe to someone who is greater than you in that regard. All right? So Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. Now he's going to be making the point here. And Levi is a descendant of Abraham. So in a sense, because Abraham, who he's going to say still had Levi in his DNA, all right? He says in his loins, he had Levi was going to be coming through him. In a sense, Levi gave tithes to Melchizedek. Now, this is merely an argument for the Hebrew writer to make that the Jewish thinking would recognize. That makes Melchizedek greater than Abraham. And since Melchizedek is greater than Abraham, that makes Melchizedek greater than Levi, the tribe of Levi, where the priesthood comes from. That makes the Melchizedekian priesthood better than the Levitical priesthood. We might not think that direction in our society, but for the Jews recognize this. They recognize it from the way the law worked. Okay? And so he, by giving a tithe to Melchizedek, Abraham was showing that Levi was lesser, let me say it the other way. Melchizedek was superior to them. There's one other thing I wanted to point out from that. What's that one phrase he said? Okay, I must have spoke on it. Verse 6. But this man who does not have his descendant from them receive tithes from Abraham. So Melchizedek is not descended from Levi. He received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promise. So Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Here's a second way of showing that he was greater than the Levitical priesthood. He then says, it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In one case, tithes are received by mortal men. Levitical priesthood receives tithes from the rest of the Jews. Keep going. Tithes are received by mortal men. But in the other case, Melchizedek, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. Now, that's a little bit more difficult, a little verse there. But again, there is nothing that shows that Melchizedek ever died. God's word doesn't show it. Jesus, we know, doesn't die. It's testified. Jesus continues to live. So again, the Levitical priesthood is made up of men who are mortal, they die. The Melchizedek priesthood, we don't know when Melchizedek died. And Jesus, who's of that order, is going to live forever after raising from the dead. So again, showing his superior. One might even say, this is where he says in verse 9, one might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. So the argument he made up above, you give tithes to someone who is greater than you. Well, Levi, through Abraham, gave tithes to Melchizedek. Now, what's all that mean? Look with me now, if you will, in verse 11. Now, if perfection, that's our word that means maturity, completeness. Told you before that the word perfect in the Bible doesn't mean sinless. It means completeness or maturity. In this case, being able to be mature spiritually or complete spiritually before God. Look at the statement. Now, if perfection, completeness, had been attained through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there be for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek? If Aaron's priesthood was good enough, you wouldn't need the order of Melchizedek. You wouldn't need someone to rise under it, is what the Hebrew writer is saying. Remember, all this is being said because these Jews are wanting to go under the old law, which would mean going under Levitical priesthood again. So the Hebrew writer is saying, if you could get what you needed under that, why would we need Jesus Christ to be high priest under the order of Melchizedek? Okay? You get the idea that the people recognized Jesus as their high priest, but they still wanted to go under the Levitical priesthood. And the Hebrew writer is saying, well, if you could go back under the Levitical priesthood and be right, you don't need Jesus as high priest. Keep reading. Verse 12. For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change of the law as well. There was a change of the priesthood. Again, like I said, they seemed to recognize Jesus as high priest. Well, how could Jesus be high priest? What tribe was Jesus from? He was from the tribe of Judah. He could not be high priest. So for Jesus to be high priest, the law had to go away. If the law didn't go away, Jesus could not be high priest. If Jesus wasn't high priest, he couldn't take symbolically the blood he offered. We studied on this a few weeks ago when he took that blood through the veil to offer it to God. He took his sacrifice to offer it to God. I paid the price. Well, if he's not high priest, he could not do that. And so, again, the Hebrew writer is trying to make it clear. Jesus Christ needs to be our high priest. If the old law was still in effect, he couldn't be our high priest. Look at how he says it, too. I love the way he says it here in the next verse or two, because he gives us something we always need to understand from God's word. Look at this point. Start with verse 12 again. For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one from whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe. As mentioned a moment ago, Jesus belonged to Judah, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah. And in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. Notice the way the Hebrew writer said that. God could have made Judah able to have priests as well if it had been his desire. All he would have done was he would have mentioned something in his law. But instead, the law says the priesthood will come from Aaron, who is of the tribe of Levi. So the priesthood comes from the tribe of Levi. Jesus was descended from the tribe of Judah. And the Hebrew writer says, it doesn't say in the Old Testament, you can't have priests from Judah. Notice what this is showing us. It doesn't say in the Old Testament, you can't have priests from Judah. You ever hear anyone say that? Well, the Bible never says we can't. Okay. The Bible never says you can't have a priest from Judah. But the Bible does say the priests will come from Levi, which automatically takes out Judah or any of the other tribes from being able to have priests come from them. So this is a wonderful little way that we can recognize that we study God's word. When it doesn't have, God's word doesn't have to say you can't do it. When God's word says you do it this way, that automatically knocks out every other way of doing it. God told Noah, you'll build the ark out of gopher wood. Could Noah build the ark out of oak? No. Could he build it out of pine? No. God's word didn't say you can't build it out of oak, Noah. He just said you will build the ark out of gopher wood. How about gopher wood and oak? He could do gopher wood with a lot of it and do oak with the rest of it. How would that be? He never said you can't build it out of oak or out of other wood with gopher wood. And if you're going to keep it right, if you just build it with ochre wood, if you build it with gopher wood and then we could call it that. We could call it ochre wood. You could have both of them together. Wish I would have meant to do that on purpose. But no. He built it out of gopher wood because that's what God commanded. He didn't use oak because God told him to build it out of gopher wood. The same thing with the idea of a priest being able to come from the tribe of Judah. Doesn't have to say you can't do it when the Bible tells you what God wants you to do. We need to use that kind of idea whenever we are working with God's word and commands from God's word. We do it the way God says. Verse 15. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, Jesus, who has become a priest on the basis of a legal requirement. Did I read that right? Yeah, who has become a priest, there's the word. I was going to say, I didn't read it. Who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent. Remember, had to come through Aaron. That's not how Jesus did it. But by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him. And this is the other quote, the other use of the word Melchizedek in the Old Testament, taken from Psalm 110, verse 4. You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. A prophecy of Jesus Christ. He would not be a priest after the order of Aaron, the order of Levi, the Levitical priesthood, however you want to say that. He was after the order of Melchizedek. Now notice how he said that there. He didn't receive it according to legal requirement, the law saying this is how it's going to be, but by the power of an indestructible life. God chose him to be priest because he was going to be around forever. That's why he was chosen. Why is that important? Look what he goes on to say. On one hand, a former commandment is set aside, that's the Levitical priesthood, because of its weakness and uselessness. Why was it weak? Keep going. For the law made nothing complete. Perfect is the word there. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. And it was not, we're going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. Hold that thought about that need for Jesus to be able to be eternal. Keep going. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were such without an oath. God did not make an oath for them to be priests. That's not how their priesthood got started. God gave his law. That's how they became priests. But this one, Jesus, was made a priest with an oath by the one who said, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. God swore Jesus would be a priest forever. What about when he died? No, you're not getting the point. He had already died, and he rose from the dead, and he was going to live forever, and he's been made high priest. Because the law was nailed to the cross at his death. Then, with his burial and resurrection, the law no longer being in effect, God could make him priest now. He made him priest with an oath. Now, why is he mentioning that at this point? Actually, I guess I shouldn't ask the question that way. Hold your hand here and turn back to the last chapter. That word oath is used once before. Look at what it says there in verse 17 and 18. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. Now, he used that idea of God not being able to lie, and that God took an oath so that we could be secure in our salvation. That's what he was talking about in chapter 6. Now, he uses that same idea, and God took another oath. And God cannot lie. He said, Jesus, you will be a priest forever. To do it, he had to take the old law out of effect, to make him a priest. In making him a priest, a law that had a priesthood that came to an end now has an oath that has a priesthood that will never end. There's no way to go back under the old law, Jewish Christians, the Hebrew writer is saying. You don't have a law to go under, and because of that, with that, you also don't have a priesthood that will do you any good. They can't be priests anymore. If they could be priests, Jesus Christ couldn't. With Jesus Christ being priests, they cannot. The two will not go together. And so he's making it clear that God has sworn this is the way it is. Just like you take advantage of the fact that God made an oath and it's impossible for him to lie, for you to have your salvation, you need to recognize the truth of, because he can't lie and he swore to Jesus, you're a priest forever. There is no more Old Testament to go under. It's a great place to go to learn about God. It's a great place to go to learn about how God expects his relationship between man and him. But it is nowhere to go to be able to receive salvation from your sins. And it certainly is nowhere to go to be able to have a priest between you and God that isn't Jesus Christ. It's a deep subject we're looking at. Understand something. The Hebrew writer made it clear over here. You're not ready for it yet. And then he says, here it comes, get ready. And we need to do the same thing. But it makes a perfect picture. It clearly shows why the old covenant is no longer in effect. Verse 22, just about done. Thank you for your attention. Verse 22, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Now, he's going to be talking about that better covenant in chapter 8. So we're not going to go there on that subject. But recognize now he's basically doing what all good preachers do. He's basically now making a transition, and it's going to work when we go into chapter 8. Okay, here's the transition. Jesus is a guarantor of a better covenant. What makes it better? Look at verse 23. The former priests were many in number. He's talking about the high priest now. Why were all the high priests many in number? Well, because every time one died, you had to have another one. One would die, you'd have another one. So from the time of Aaron, who was the first high priest, all the way up until Jesus Christ died on the cross, there were many high priests because they kept dying. That's what the Hebrew writer said. There was many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in the office. They died. They couldn't be high priests. But he, Jesus, holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him. We will always be able to reach God through Jesus Christ. We will always be able to reach forgiveness of our sins through Jesus Christ, our high priest. He sits at the right hand of God. He's constantly taking care of our sin. Whereas you will never have to worry that he's going to die one day. And who's going to take care of our sins next? The next high priest? There's not going to be another high priest. Jesus is high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Verse 25. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. I finish that verse up. That's why he is a better high priest than all of the high priests combined under the old covenant. Even combined, they only went, well, how long was that? 1,500 years that the old law was in effect? Remember our studying this morning in our sermon, how long it was from Moses until Jesus Christ came on the scene? 1,500 years is all that priesthood lasted. Jesus Christ today has lasted over 1,900 years. And if this earth lasts another million years, or another million years, if it lasts a million years, it hasn't been a million years yet. If it lasts a million years, he will still be high priest, and he'll be that much more than the priesthood. And when this earth comes to an end, and we then live with God and Jesus for eternity, Jesus Christ's priesthood will continue from that point forward. And so it'll be that much longer than the 1,500 years that there was ever a high priest under the old law. It's a much better priesthood. Verse 26. For it is indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, one who doesn't die, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins, and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all, when he offered himself. For the law appoints men in their weaknesses as high priests. They were weak because they sin as well. They need offering for their sins first, so that they could offer for the sins of the people, and that wouldn't last until the next time they needed to offer again. Jesus Christ offered once for all the people, for all time, never to need to offer again, and never offering a sacrifice for himself, because he never sinned. Verse 28. For the law appoints men in their weaknesses as high priests, because they sinned, but the word of the oath, God making an oath, Jesus is high priest, which came later than the law. It came in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 110, verse 4, about 500 years after the law, or so. Came after that. Which came later than the law, appoints a son. Well, actually, I guess it's also mentioning the oath came when Jesus Christ, it was a prophecy of the oath with David. It came when Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead, is when the oath came for Jesus. But for the word of the oath, which has come later than the law, appoints a son who has been made complete forever. Has that word perfect again. It doesn't mean sinless. We can see it perfectly here. No pun intended. We can see it clearly here that it doesn't mean sinless, because Jesus wasn't made sinless. Jesus Christ was sinless. He never was anything but sinless. So it means he was made complete. His mission was finished. He was made a priest. He will never be anything different. He will never not be a priest. He will always be God's high priest forever. And verse 8 starts, and I just want to make the connection so we can make certain we realize this is a continuation of a point. We're not going to go into verse 8, chapter 8. Now, the point is in what we are saying is this. We have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty and high, a minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. The one of the old covenant was set up by man, made by those of the Israelites who offered things to make the tabernacle under the old law. He's going to go into how the new covenant tabernacle is better than the old covenant tabernacle in the next couple of chapters. He's going to go into how the new covenant is better than the old covenant in the next couple of chapters. But he's going to complete this thought that he has begun, but he has clearly made it firm that Jesus Christ is high priest. For the Jews to want to go under the old law was to go under a system that would never again be able to offer sacrifice for sins and be acceptable to God. The temple wasn't destroyed until 70 AD. Up until that point, there were priests going in and offering sacrifices, and they were wasting their time. Look going to see something about that, by the way, in a little bit when we get into next week when we get into chapter 8, how it was becoming obsolete and would soon be gone forever. Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And then the lineages of the priests were going to be gone. They wouldn't know who had the right to be high priest. Didn't matter anyway. No one had the right to be high priest, and you know what the lineage was. We don't tend to have that problem today, at least in the Lord's church today. You don't see a whole lot about people wanting to go under the old law. But we do have a world that believes that the old law was still in effect. You're supposed to still be following what the old law says. The Hebrew writer makes it clear that that's just not true. And we need to be a people that believe the Hebrew writer over what men want to believe. Who would want to be under an old covenant that's been nailed to the cross, that's no longer in effect, that doesn't have an effective priesthood, that has no way of having forgiveness of sins? But we have a high priest that is able to forgive our sins. That's a blessing. If anyone tonight needs the prayers of the church in any way, if you're not a Christian, I know that there may be people watching this on Facebook or wherever. If you are not a Christian, you need to become one. There's no salvation without going through Jesus Christ. He said in John chapter 14, verse